Here's a little case study that they probably won't be teaching anytime soon in business school, even though it's pretty eye-opening. This was by far the best year the WNBA has ever had. They set an all-time record for total television viewers at 54 million. They set an all-time record for the number of telecasts that reached at least 1 million viewers. They had their highest total attendance in more than 2 decades, up roughly 50% from last year. The All-Star Game recorded its most fan votes in history at 10 million votes, more than a 500% increase from last year. The Indiana Fever, the team Caitlin Clark plays for, set an all-time single-season record for attendance by a WNBA team. The league saw a 350% year-over-year growth in subscriptions to their paid streaming service. The league had more social media engagement, more sellout crowds, more news coverage, more merchandise sales than ever before. This was the kind of season that WNBA executives never imagined was even possible. Now, given all these facts, how much money do you think the WNBA made this year? How much cash did this historic season actually bring in? What kind of profit were they able to reap from all of this success? You might remember that earlier in this year, there were some estimates that maybe things weren't looking all that great. And it turns out that now that the final numbers are in, those estimates were very accurate. In total, according to New York Post, the WNBA lost $40 million this year, in its best year on record. They exceeded pretty much every metric in the book, and they managed to earn negative $40 million. This is a business that has never been profitable in its history, and it's now abundantly clear that nothing can ever change that. I mean, it is a fatally flawed concept because the overwhelming majority of Americans have no interest in watching women play basketball. Even when record numbers of Americans are interested, it's still not that many. And that's one of the many reasons it was illuminating to read Caitlin Clark's recent front page article in Time magazine, which is something that apparently still exists, and which just named Clark their Athlete of the Year. And this is an interview that includes probably the single biggest backhanded compliment that's ever been printed in the history of backhanded compliments. And at the same time, it includes Caitlin Clark's official capitulation to the left's anti-white racial narrative, which everyone should have seen coming a long time ago. But here's the part that I'm talking about, straight from Time magazine. It says this, quote, "Clark is cognizant of the racial underpinnings of her stardom. I want to say I've earned every single thing, but as a white person, there is privilege," says Clark. "A lot of those players in the league that have been really good have been black players. This league has kind of been built on them. The more we can appreciate that, highlight that, talk about that, and then continue to have brands and companies invest in those players that have made this league incredible, I think it's very important. I have to continue to try to change that. The more we can elevate black women, that's going to be a beautiful thing." Okay, 2 things are happening here. First of all, Clark is crediting black women for building the WNBA. Without black women, she says, there is no WNBA, and she apparently means that as a kind of a compliment, even though in practical terms, it's a bit like praising Bernie Madoff for managing a successful asset management firm, or Elizabeth Holmes for founding Theranos, or Kenneth Lay for running Enron. Normally, when someone creates a business that serves no purpose other than to light people's money on fire, it's not something you praise them for. Okay, so if black women built the WNBA, they built the least successful professional sports league ever. And also, it's not even true, by the way. The WNBA was built and is still maintained by the NBA. So men built the WNBA. Without men, the WNBA would not exist. But Caitlin Clark is coming out and crediting black women for their role in establishing a league that nobody watches. She says that black women in particular deserve to be elevated, and it's clear why she's saying this. She's saying this because she is, I'm sorry to say, a coward. To protect her endorsement deals and her good status at the WNBA, Clark has decided to affirm the single most destructive lie of the generation, which is that white people are inherently indebted to black people because of their skin color, and that black people solely on account of their skin color deserve special treatment at the expense of whites. That's what she just came out and endorsed. Did you know that American homeowners have over $32 trillion in equity? That's mind-boggling. But here's what's concerning. Cyber criminals are targeting it with a scam the FBI calls house stealing. It's disturbingly simple. With just one forged document and a fake notary stamp, criminals can transfer your home's title to their name. And from there, they can take out loans or even sell your home, all without you knowing. The worst part, you don't find out until the foreclosure or collection notices show up in your mailbox. By then, It's too late. You're stuck with a financial and legal nightmare. But there's a way to protect yourself, just like my producer Sean Hampton protects their home with triple lock protection from Home Title Lock. Here's what it does. It monitors your title 24/7, urgently alerts you to any change in your title, and if fraud does happen, their team steps in to restore your title at no extra cost to you. When was the last time you checked your home title? If you're like most people, probably never. That's exactly what scammers are banking on. So how can you stop them? Head to HometitleLock.com, use promo code Walsh for a free title history report and a 30-day free trial of triple lock protection. Don't wait. Protect your home before it's too late. That's HometitleLock.com, promo code Walsh. Now, there's no need to explain in any detail how much damage this ideology has caused this country over the past decade. It's led to grave injustices in every single area of life for people of every race and both genders. But more importantly than that, of course, it's wrong as a matter of principle. And most Americans realize it's wrong. That's a big part of the reason Kamala Harris was just defeated. It's why DEI departments are being gutted all over the country, from college campuses to Fortune 500 companies. But Clark is clinging to this ideology, and she's not the only one doing it. And we'll have more on that in a moment. But, to be clear, it's not surprising that Clark would come out and say this and bend the knee. A lot of conservatives are kind of acting shocked by this Time magazine profile, but you should not be shocked by it. Did you actually think she wouldn't bend the knee to this stuff? Of course she did. Of course she did. And there were signs. Just a few months ago on SNL, for example, Clark went out of her way in the middle of an alleged comedy segment to credit a series of black women for her success. Watch.
Good luck in the WNBA. I hope you have a great first season.
Thanks. I'm sure it will be a big first step for me. But it's just one step for the WNBA. Thanks to all the great players like Cheryl Swoops, Lisa Leslie, Cynthia Cooper, the great Dawn Staley, and my basketball hero, Maya Moore. These are the women that kicked down the door so I could walk inside. So I want to thank them tonight for laying the foundation. And Michael, since you're such a big fan, I brought you a souvenir. It's an apron signed by me.
Just another hilarious SNL bit there. Great, funny stuff. Now, she doesn't name a single white player, and that's not because there haven't been good white players in the WNBA, at least by the standards of the WNBA. According to the internet, which I'm relying on for all of my information about the WNBA, somebody named Sue Bird was pretty good, for example. She played for something called the Seattle Storm, which exists. And Sue Bird became the first player in the history of the WNBA to win titles in 3 different decades. One of the greatest female point guards of all time, apparently. So why isn't Sue Bird getting credit for kicking down the doors so that Caitlin Clark could walk through them? Now, of course, maybe the biggest sign that Clark would start openly apologizing for being white was that she got assaulted all season long and never seemed to have a big issue with it. And I'm talking about flagrant attacks on the court where she was knocked over, jabbed in the eye, etc. All of these attacks were committed by black players, as far as I can tell. And these players never really even expressed remorse. In fact, in some cases, they taunted Caitlin Clark afterwards. So here's just a small selection of this sort of treatment.
Following the pass to Boston. Clark in pain after she caught that fingertip in the eye or right around it from Carrington with no whistle. Now there's nothing Indiana can challenge here because no call on the floor was made.
One-on-one, Sammy Whitcomb with 8 seconds left. Goes around to Gumake, drives baseline, and shot rejected by Izzy McMagor. Second opportunity is up and in by Nalissa Smith. Very entertaining first half about Seattle, and all of a sudden, we're pretty close. This has been as close as it's been all second quarter long, 44.
New reaction after this controversial foul on Caitlin Clark.
Unnecessary.
Clark's Indiana Fever taking on the Chicago Sky on Saturday. The Sky's Kennedy Carter hitting a shot, then heading over to Clark and shoulder checking her. The refs called it a common foul, but the league yesterday upgraded the call to a flagrant foul.
Trust Arena, the Fever really stretched out this one in the second half as we look at Diamond DeShields and Caitlin Clark.
Okay, so just that kind of stuff all season long. And if the clips demonstrate anything, it's that, Caitlin Clark doesn't seem to have privilege in this league, although she says she's privileged. As a white woman in the WNBA, she seems to have anything but privilege, and she knows this. She knows it better than anyone. Yet she claims that she has privilege, even after suffering through a season where she was repeatedly physically assaulted because of her race. That's the privilege of being white in the WNBA. The reason she's getting attention, on the other hand, is not that she's white, it's that she's good by league standards. Despite getting physically attacked all the time, she set WNBA records for most points by a rookie, most assists, becoming the fastest player to record 300 points, and so on. The reason she's reviled and abused, on the other hand, is purely because of her race. I mean, that's the only reason that anyone wouldn't like her, that her teammates or competitors wouldn't like her. In fact, this Time magazine profile makes that very clear. They quote her teammate, a woman with a name I can't pronounce, as saying, quote, "In a sport dominated by Black/African-American players, white America has rallied around Caitlin Clark. The support looks mostly amazing, sometimes fanatical and territorial, sometimes racist. It seems that the great white hope syndrome is at play again." That's quite a teammate. In other words, she's saying white people are only supporting Caitlin Clark because they want to see a white person dominate a sport that's mostly played by black women. That's supposedly the only reason some white people are now actually watching the sport and going to the games. They're such committed white supremacists that they're willing to subject themselves to hours of WNBA games just to stick it to black women, apparently. This is the kind of thing that makes it very obvious the WNBA is never going to have another decent season ever again. Because the moment they get some new fans, they immediately smear their new fans as racist. And a lot of these players are doing it. The Time magazine piece also contains this insight from another player, Asia Wilson is her name, quote, "It doesn't matter what we all do as black women, we're still going to be swept underneath the rug. That's why it boils my blood when people say it's not about race, because it is." This has become part of the mythology in women's basketball for a long time. They seem to have convinced themselves that nobody watches their games because of racism. That was the message that a UConn player named Paige Buchers delivered at the ESPYs a few years ago at the height of the BLM mania. Watch.
As a white woman who leads a black-led sport and celebrated here, I want to show a light on black women. They don't get the media coverage that they deserve. They've given so much to this sport and the community and society as a whole, and their value is undeniable. And in the WNBA last season, the postseason awards, 80% of the winners were black, but they got half the amount of coverage as the white athletes. So I think it's time for change. Sports media holds the key to storylines. Sports media and sponsors tell us who is valuable, and you have told the world that I matter today, and everyone who voted, thank you. But I think we should use this power together to also celebrate black women.
So it's the same script that Caitlin Clark is reading 3 years later, as if nothing's changed. And hopefully I don't need to explain the problem here. To claim that, people don't care about black basketball players or that black basketball players are getting swept under the rug is to ignore the fact that out of the 100 most popular and wealthiest and most praised and adored basketball players of all time, maybe like 10 of them are white, maybe. Obviously, the vast, vast majority of the greatest and most visible and most widely loved and admired basketball players of all time are black. I mean, the most marketable and marketed athlete in history in any sport is a black guy named Michael Jordan. Maybe you've heard of him. So this narrative wants us to pretend like none of that exists. But things have changed. Most people aren't willing to play, this game of pretend anymore. People are no longer willing to believe that there's a vast conspiracy to ignore the many accomplishments of black women in the WNBA. Now people are more likely to believe the truth, which is that people are ignoring the WNBA because it's just not a great product and people aren't interested in it. If you don't believe that, consider the overwhelmingly negative response to a message that was posted yesterday by outgoing Congressman Jamal Bowman. Now, Bowman, of course, is best known for pulling a fire alarm and lying about it. Here's what he wrote on X, totally unprompted. Quote, "Dear white people, I don't know why I feel the need to keep talking to you. I don't know why part of me still has hope for you and for us. Some of you are too far gone, but maybe enough of you aren't and will join us in a fight to end white supremacy." Now, goes without saying, you cannot imagine this guy's still a congressman at the moment. Now we can see why he's not going to be one anymore. But you just cannot imagine a white congressman posting a note on social media saying, "Dear black people, I don't know why I still bother talking to you people. You know, most of you are too far gone." Like, you can't, it would never happen. I mean, not in a million years would that happen. Bowman then followed up this open letter to white people by lying about the Rodney King trial and the Daniel Penny case, among others. In response, thousands of people pointed out to Jamal Bowman that he should probably move to Liberia if he hates white people so much. And putting it mildly, the reaction was overwhelmingly negative. And then Bowman responded with this, quote, "Wow, this has been so triggering for so many of you. Do you realize you're actually proving my point? If you're triggered by this, imagine how I must feel when black people are murdered consistently and there is no justice. Y'all can't handle a tweet. Fascinating." Now, back at the height of BLM, this series of posts probably would have been effective. You know, there was an appetite for this type of low-effort race baiting, but there's no appetite for this stuff anymore, as the response on X demonstrates. But there are other members of Congress who will actually be returning next year who are just as committed to this anti-white orthodoxy, even though it's well past its expiration date. Several of them just came out and demanded that Joe Biden commute the sentences of everybody on death row on racial grounds. Watch.
Today, on Human Rights Day, we call on President Biden to do the right thing, to use his clemency authority to commute the death sentences of the 40 individuals on death row, to resentence them to a prison term, and to save lives. State-sanctioned murder is not justice. And the death penalty is a cruel, racist, and fundamentally flawed punishment that has no place in our society. It is deeply discriminatory and has disproportionately been weaponized against black, brown, and low-income families for far too long. It is long past time for President Biden to make good on his campaign promise to address the federal death penalty. With 40 days left in his presidency, we must move with urgency and ensure that history never repeats itself.
Now, the claim you just heard that federal death row disproportionately consists of black and brown people just isn't true. Black people commit something like 50% of the murders in this country, according to FBI data. But the federal death row is only about 38% black. It's 15% Hispanic and 45% white. So, if anything, death row is disproportionately affecting white people. That's what the numbers say. But nobody in their right mind thinks along these lines, because everyone on death row obviously deserves to be there. These are criminals, almost always repeat offenders, who have been convicted of some of the most heinous crimes it's possible for a person to commit, including kidnapping and murdering 12-year-old girls, executing bank guards, shooting witnesses so they can't testify in court. It includes a police officer in New Orleans who conspired with a drug dealer to murder a woman who filed a police brutality complaint against him. It includes a mass shooter. It includes the Boston Marathon bomber. I mean, these are the kinds of people that Democrats have decided after their crushing defeat in November must be defended. I mean, Americans made it very clear that they're unhappy with the cost of living, with public safety, with illegal immigration. And Democrats have responded with, well, best we can do is commute the sentences of death row inmates. How about that? I mean, these inmates are the absolute dregs of society, but Democrats in Congress have decided to campaign on behalf of these murderers because some of them are black. Now, what this means is that despite the results of last month's election, the left is pushing ahead with the same racial narrative we've seen so many times before. They're completely oblivious to the fact that no one, except apparently Caitlin Clark, is receptive to this kind of demagoguery anymore, or very few people are. For her part, Caitlin Clark has endorsement deals to worry about. No one else really has any incentive to tolerate this stuff. And if there's a reason to be bullish right now about Republicans' prospects in future elections, it's that Democrats, whether they're in Congress or the WNBA, seem incapable of figuring this out. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.